On Thursday, August 18, 2014, the blood-soaked bodies of 42-year-old Vivienne Crawford and her son-in-law, 27-year-old Ethan Monroe, were discovered in an exclusive beachfront villa at 488 Ocean Drive. What Miami-Dade police initially ruled as a tragic murder-suicide has raised alarming questions. What triggered this violent end in one of Coral Gables' most prestigious neighborhoods? And why were both victims clutching identical love letters? Lead detective Maya Rodriguez, a veteran of Miami-Dade's homicide division, steps in to investigate what's becoming South Florida's most twisted family tragedy. Isla Monroe traced her fingers along the cool glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Miami's sunset cast golden shadows across her infinity pool. At 26, she had crafted a life that gleamed like the marble floors of her Coral Gables mansion. Beautiful, polished, and utterly perfect. Her position as senior curator at Miami's most prestigious gallery hadn't come easily. But then again, nothing in Isla's life ever had. Except, perhaps, falling in love with Ethan. She smiled, remembering how they'd met at her first major gallery opening 2 years ago. Ethan Monroe had commanded attention even then, his 27 years worn like an expensive suit, confident, sophisticated, and impossible to ignore. Now, as a rising star at Goldman Sachs's Miami office, he was becoming the kind of success story that made the Wall Street Journal take notice. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a fairy-tale wedding that still had Miami's social circles talking. The sharp click of heels against marble interrupted her reverie. Mrs. Monroe. Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. "Your mother is here." Isla's fingers tightened around her wine glass. These surprise visits from Vivienne had become more frequent lately, each one feeling less like maternal concern and more like surveillance. The heavy scent of her mother's signature perfume reached her before the voice did. "Darling." Vivienne Crawford's presence filled the space like expensive perfume, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. At 42, she remained stunning, the kind of beauty that made heads turn and conversations stop mid-sentence. Today's white sundress highlighted her perfect tan, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists like tiny warnings. "I was just in the neighborhood," Vivienne announced, though her Louboutins and fresh blowout suggested otherwise. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, scanned the room before settling on the entryway. "Peonies? In August? Oh, sweetheart, you know they're not in season. And that arrangement, it lacks sophistication." Classic Vivienne, even the simplest observation carried the weight of criticism. Isla had spent her life in her mother's shadow, watching as Vivienne commanded attention effortlessly while she built her own success quietly but deliberately. Every achievement in Isla's life had come with Vivienne's subtle undermining, her constant reminder that her daughter would never quite measure up to her standards. "Ethan picked them up yesterday," Isla replied, trying to keep the defensive note from her voice. "He knows they're my favorite. Not everything needs to follow the rules, mother." Something flickered across Vivienne's face, too quick to catch, gone before it could be named. "How attentive of him. Speaking of your charming husband, where is Ethan? Working late again? Third time this week, isn't it?" The question carried an undertone that made Isla's skin prickle. Lately, her mother's interest in Ethan had felt different. The way she said his name, how her eyes followed him at family gatherings, her constant questions about his schedule. It was more than her usual controlling nature. It was something possessive, almost hungry. "Major client dinner," Isla explained, moving to the kitchen to refill her glass. The wine splashed a little too forcefully, dark red drops staining the pristine counter. The Peterson account could be huge for the firm. Ethan's been working towards this for months. Of course, of course." Vivienne followed, her heels echoing through the house like a countdown. "You know, darling, a man like Ethan, he needs support. Understanding. You can't expect him to rush home every night like some 9-to-5 accountant. Men in his position, they have needs." "I know exactly what Ethan needs, mother." The words came out sharper than intended, slicing through the carefully maintained veneer of politeness. But did she? The thought crept in unbidden, like a shadow at sunset. The last few weeks, something had shifted. Ethan's kisses had grown distracted, his touches mechanical. Their bed, once warm with passion, now felt like a frozen landscape of unspoken words and avoided glances. The change had been subtle at first, a missed dinner here, a cancelled weekend there. But now, his phone buzzed at odd hours, and he'd step onto the balcony to take calls in hushed tones. When she asked about his day, his answers came too smooth, too rehearsed, like lines from a script he'd memorized. The intimacy they'd once shared had been replaced by something performative, as if they were actors in a play about a perfect marriage rather than living one. "I just worry," Vivienne continued, running a perfectly manicured finger along the kitchen counter, examining it for dust that wouldn't dare exist. "The world of high finance, it can be demanding. Tempting. There are always beautiful women at those client dinners. You know? Women who understand that world. Women with experience. Like you did? Before Daddy died." The words slipped out before Isla could stop them, sharp and venomous. Vivienne's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened to chips of ice. "I only want what's best for you, darling. For both of you. Someone needs to look out for your interests." Later that night, as Isla lay alone in their king-sized bed, she replayed the conversation. Her mother had always been controlling, possessive even. But lately, there was something else in her interest in Ethan, something that made Isla's instincts scream in warning. Every interaction seemed loaded with hidden meaning, every comment about Ethan tinged with an intimacy that made her uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan, "Don't wait up. Client needs hand-holding. Home late." Isla stared at the message, remembering their beginning 2 years ago. The whirlwind romance, the fairytale wedding, the honeymoon in the Maldives where they'd barely left their villa. Ethan had been attentive then, present, his eyes lighting up every time she entered a room. Now, the house felt too big, too empty, filled with shadows that whispered of secrets. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. But the truth? The truth was beyond even her darkest imaginings. As she drifted off to sleep, her mother's words echoed in her mind, "I only want what's best for you." But in the morning, Isla would remember something else. The way Vivienne's perfume, jasmine and vanilla, had lingered on Ethan's collar the last time he came home late. The perfect marriage, it seemed, was nothing but a perfect lie. The signs had been there for weeks, accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. Ethan's side of the bed grew cold more often than not, his excuses about late meetings and client dinners piling up like unopened mail on their marble countertop. Isla found herself dining alone, the echo of her fork against fine china the only sound in their cavernous dining room. Each night, she would plate a perfect dinner, light the handmade Italian candles, and wait. By midnight, the food would be cold, the candles burnt down to stubs, and Isla's heart a little more hollow. Tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't waiting. The setting sun cast long shadows across Ocean Drive as Isla's Mercedes followed Ethan's Bentley at a careful distance. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, the weight of her wedding ring suddenly heavy on her finger. She had hired Thomas Blake, Miami's most discreet private investigator, 3 days ago. His message this afternoon had been cryptic but clear, "Today's the day. Follow him." Ethan's car turned off the main road, heading toward the exclusive stretch of beachfront known for its secluded private villas. Isla's throat tightened as she watched him pull up to the Villa Marina, a discreet luxury property famous for its privacy and no-questions-asked policy. Through the gathering dusk, she watched him check in, his confident stride so familiar it made her heart ache. She parked in the shadows of a nearby palm grove, killing the engine. The humid Florida air pressed against her skin as she waited, her designer dress clinging uncomfortably. What would she find? Another woman? A secret family? Each possibility felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Then a familiar white Mercedes pulled into the villa's circular drive. No. 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 Isla's world tilted on its axis as she watched her mother step out of the car. Vivienne looked stunning as always in a form-fitting red dress, her movements practiced and graceful. This had to be a mistake. A coincidence. Maybe Vivienne was meeting someone else. Maybe. The thought died as Ethan emerged from the villa. Their greeting wasn't rushed or furtive like guilty lovers. It was comfortable, practiced. He pulled Vivienne into his arms with the ease of long familiarity, and when they kissed, it wasn't with the hesitation of the forbidden. It was with hunger, with passion, with the kind of intimacy that only comes from years of knowing someone's body. Isla's stomach heaved. She fumbled with her car door, barely making it out before emptying the contents of her stomach onto the manicured lawn. The world spun around her as pieces started falling into place. Her mother's constant presence, her intimate knowledge of Ethan's schedule, the way she always seemed to know things about him that Isla didn't. Her phone buzzed. Blake's promised report had arrived. With trembling fingers, she opened the file, each word another nail in the coffin of her marriage. Bank statements showing regular payments to the villa going back 3 years. Photos spanning the same timeline, Ethan and Vivienne at private restaurants, entering hotels, sharing intimate moments they thought were hidden from the world. But it was the final revelation that shattered what remained of Isla's world. Emails between Vivienne and Ethan from before Isla had even met him. Their first meeting hadn't been chance. It had been orchestrated. Every detail of their chance encounter at the gallery opening had been planned by Vivienne. She had positioned Ethan perfectly, knowing her daughter's tastes, knowing exactly how to make him appear to be Isla's perfect match. The truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her mother had never wanted Ethan to be Isla's husband. She had wanted him for herself. The marriage was just a convenient way to keep him close, to maintain their affair while preserving their social standing. Isla wasn't the wife. She was the cover story. Through the villa's expansive windows, she could see them now, moving through the luxuriously appointed space with the familiarity of regular visitors. Ethan poured wine into crystal glasses while Vivienne's laugh, that practiced, perfect laugh, floated out into the evening air. They looked happy, comfortable, like two people who had been together for years. Which they had been. Memory after memory resurfaced, each one tainted by this new knowledge. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual drop-by from her mother, all of them opportunities for stolen moments with Ethan. How many times had she left them alone together, trusting them completely? How many times had they laughed at her behind her back, sharing secret smiles while she remained blissfully ignorant? The last 3 weeks of cold dinners and empty beds took on a new, horrific meaning. He hadn't been working late. He'd been with her mother. Those business trips, those client meetings, those late-night phone calls. How many nights had he left their marriage bed to crawl into her mother's? Isla sat in her car until the stars came out, watching the shadows move behind the villa's windows. Each passing minute crystallized her pain into something harder, colder. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about her entire life being a carefully constructed lie. Her mother hadn't just stolen her husband. She had orchestrated every moment of Isla's happiness specifically so she could destroy it. As she finally drove home through the quiet Miami streets, Isla's tears had dried. In their place was something new, a burning, ice-cold rage. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect deception. They thought they had controlled every aspect of this twisted game. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. She was Vivienne Crawford's daughter. And if there was one thing her mother had taught her, it was how to destroy someone completely. The memories came flooding back now, a cascade of warning signs Isla had ignored for years. She remembered being 16, watching her mother circle her high school tennis coach like a predator. Mr. James, barely 30, married with a newborn. Within months, he'd resigned, his marriage in shambles. Vivienne had simply smiled at the news, that same calculating smile she now wore around Ethan. Then there was David, her college boyfriend. 22 and ambitious, he'd been fascinated by Vivienne's stories of corporate success. Those late-night career mentoring sessions had ended with David ghosting Isla, only to appear months later at one of her mother's charity galas, looking haunted and refusing to meet her eyes. Pattern after pattern emerged, each more disturbing than the last. The young valets she'd flirt with at country club events. The fresh-faced associates at her investment firm. Every man in Isla's life had been subjected to her mother's predatory attention, each one a potential conquest in Vivienne's endless game of desire and control. But Ethan was different. He wasn't just another conquest. He was an obsession. Isla waited in his office, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the photos on her phone. Evidence collected over sleepless nights of investigation. Ethan's keycard clicked in the lock. He froze in the doorway, his face draining of color at the sight of her. "Sit down," Isla commanded, her voice ice-cold. "We need to talk about Mother." Ethan's collapse was instantaneous. His carefully maintained facade of success crumbled, revealing something broken underneath. "I tried to end it," he whispered, sinking into his leather chair. "God, Isla, I tried so many times." "When?" The word came out like a whip crack. "Before or after you married me?" "Both. All the time." His hands shook as he loosened his tie. "But she owns me. Everything I have, everything I've built, it's all her. The startup capital for my first venture, the connections that got me this position, the clients that make up half our portfolio. Tell me everything." The story poured out of him in desperate waves. How Vivienne had approached him at a business conference 3 years ago, offering mentorship that quickly turned to seduction. How she'd manipulated him with a combination of threats and rewards, building his dependency on her influence while isolating him from other connections. "She has photos," he continued, eyes wild. "Records of every transaction, every favor. One word from her to the SEC about certain creative accounting practices she suggested, and I'm finished. Prison finished." Isla's mind raced back to similar conversations with her father years ago, before his heart attack. The way he tried to warn her about Vivienne's collecting habits, his voice slurring from too much scotch. "Your mother doesn't love people," he'd said. "She acquires them." "The marriage," Isla pressed. "Whose idea was it?" "Hers. God, it was all hers." Ethan's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "She said it was perfect, the ultimate cover story. No one would suspect a man of sleeping with his mother-in-law. She orchestrated everything, from our accidental meeting to the proposal. Even picked out the ring." Isla thought of the diamond on her finger, the one her mother had praised as exactly what I would have chosen. "Because, of course, she had. She has a room," Ethan continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "In her house. Hidden behind her walk-in closet. It's like a shrine. Photos of me everywhere. Receipts from every meal, every hotel. Recordings of our conversations. She makes me call her every night at exactly 11:15. If I'm late, if I miss a call." The pieces clicked into place. The late-night phone calls she'd attributed to work. The way her mother always seemed to know Ethan's schedule better than she did. The constant surveillance disguised as maternal concern. "Show me," Isla demanded, pulling up her mother's social media on her tablet. "Show me what I've been missing." Together, they scrolled through years of photos. Vivienne at charity events, always surrounded by men decades her junior. The careful way she positioned herself in group shots, establishing physical dominance through subtle touches and poses. The predatory gleam in her eyes, visible now that Isla knew to look for it. "She doesn't see me as her daughter anymore," Isla realized, the words tasting like ash. "I'm competition. A rival for your attention." "Worse," Ethan whispered. "Your property. Her property. And in her mind, I'm stealing what belongs to her by showing you any genuine affection." Isla's phone buzzed. A text from Vivienne. "Darling, joining us for dinner tonight? Ethan promised to come early to help me with some investment decisions." The rage that had been building in Isla's chest crystallized into something sharp and cold. Her mother hadn't just stolen her husband. She'd stolen every chance at happiness Isla had ever had. Every relationship, every potential love, all sacrificed on the altar of Vivienne's insatiable need to possess and control. "We're going to destroy her," Isla said quietly, her mother's predatory smile finally finding its way to her own lips. "But first, I need you to do exactly what I say." For the first time since he'd entered the office, real hope flickered in Ethan's eyes. "Anything. Call her back. Tell her yes to dinner." Isla's fingers tightened around her phone. It's time Mother learned what it feels like to lose everything she loves. Vivienne traced her fingers over the photographs hidden in her bedroom shrine, remembering that first night with Ethan 3 years ago. The way he'd looked in the dim light of the hotel bar, young and hungry for success. The way his hands had trembled when she'd first touched him, a mix of desire and fear that still made her blood sing. They'd been explosive together, dangerous, perfect. Now, something was wrong. She could feel him slipping away. The love letters she'd found in his office desk last week had shaken her. Beautiful handwriting on expensive paper, speaking of secret meetings and passionate encounters. My darling E, they began, each one more intimate than the last. The signature was always the same, forever yours, C. Who is she? Vivienne had screamed at him yesterday, hurling a crystal tumbler against the wall of their secret villa. Who is she? Ethan had denied everything, of course, but she'd seen the changes. The way he'd started canceling their regular meetings. The mysterious calls he took in hushed tones. Even their passionate encounters had grown mechanical, his mind clearly elsewhere. The memory of their early days tortured her. Summer afternoons in luxury hotel suites, his young body wrapped around hers like he never wanted to let go. The way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, promising anything, everything. I'll give you the world, he'd said then, meaning it. And he had, his success was her creation. Every step orchestrated by her connections, her influence, her love. Now her phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Watch him tonight. La Marina Restaurant. 8 p.m. The fifth such message this week. Each one had proven true. Ethan in intimate conversations with a stunning brunette. Their heads close together, sharing secrets that should have been only for Vivienne. She scrolled through her photo gallery, hundreds of pictures of Ethan. Ethan at charity galas. Ethan sleeping in their villa. Ethan by the pool at her house, before she'd arranged his marriage to Isla. Her foolish daughter, thinking she'd found true love, never suspecting she was just a convenient cover for the greatest passion Miami had ever seen. The phone rang, their special ringtone. But when she answered, there was only silence, then a woman's laugh in the background. Click. Vivienne's hands shook as she poured another glass of wine. The letters, the calls, the sightings, it was all becoming too much. She'd sacrificed everything for this love. Her relationship with her daughter. Her reputation, if anyone ever found out. Even her other young lovers. She'd given them all up for Ethan. The anonymous warnings kept coming, his planning to leave. He has a new love. You're too old for him now. Each message stabbed deeper than the last. She found herself driving past his office at odd hours, checking his usual haunts. Last night, she'd followed him to South Beach, watching as he dined with a woman who looked like a younger version of herself. The rage had been blinding. The shrine in her bedroom grew. New photos joined the old ones, surveillance shots from her private investigator, screenshots of his text messages, records of every call, every meeting, every breath he took without her. You're becoming obsessed, Isla had said during their last lunch, her tone oddly knowing. People are starting to notice, Mother. But what did Isla know of love like this? Of passion that consumed every waking moment? Of need that burned through propriety and reason? Another text buzzed. A photo of Ethan entering a jewelry store, emerging with a small bag. But he'd never bought her jewelry. That would be too risky, too obvious. Which meant, the wine glass shattered in her grip, red liquid staining the white carpet like blood. Memories flooded back, teaching him how to order wine properly, how to charm board members, how to make love to a woman who knew what she wanted. She'd created him, shaped him from raw clay into the success he was today. Every dollar in his bank account, every connection in his phone, all her doing. If I can't have you, she whispered to his photo, no one will. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Final warning, she will destroy you both. Ethan's response to her subsequent call was terse. Not now, Vivienne. I'm in a meeting. A meeting. At 9 p.m. With her. She grabbed her car keys, her mind spinning with images of their past passion mixed with visions of his betrayal. The gun in her bedside drawer caught her eye, a small, elegant thing bought years ago for protection. She tucked it into her purse. Later, she would remember this moment, the exact second when obsession tipped over into madness. But now, all she could think of was reaching him, stopping him, keeping him. She'd given up everything for this love. She'd orchestrated an entire marriage to keep him close. She would not lose him now. What she didn't see was Isla watching from across the street, a cold smile playing on her lips as her mother sped away into the night. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Step 1. Plant the seeds of doubt. Step 2. Water them with fear. Step 3. Watch obsession bloom into destruction. The next text was already typed, ready to send to Ethan. She's coming for you. La Marina. She knows everything. And then, mother and daughter would finally have their reckoning. The beach house stood dark against the twilight sky, waves crashing against the shore in a steady rhythm that matched Isla's heartbeat. She watched from the shadows of the deck as Ethan's Bentley pulled up, his movements jerky and uncertain as he made his way to the door. Isla. His voice trembled. You said we needed to talk about making things right. She stepped into the dim light, maintaining a careful distance. Wait inside, Ethan. Mother's coming too. Time we cleared the air as a family. His face went ash white. No, you don't understand. She's not stable right now. The messages, the stalking. Headlights swept across the beach house. Vivienne's white Mercedes screeched to a halt, and she emerged like a fury unleashed. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her perfectly maintained hair wild, mascara smeared beneath eyes that held a manic gleam. In her trembling hand, she clutched a small leather album, her precious collection of memories. You ungrateful bastard! Vivienne's scream cut through the night air. After everything I've done for you. Ethan backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Vivienne, please. Please? Please. She advanced on him, hurling the album. Photos scattered across the floor, intimate moments stolen in luxury hotels, secret rendezvous on private beaches, every moment of their affair documented with obsessive precision. Look at us. Look at what we were. That night in Paris, the way you held me at the Ritz. The promises you whispered in Venice. Every touch, every kiss, it was perfect. Isla melted deeper into the shadows, watching her mother's sanity unravel thread by thread. Remember how you were when I found you. Vivienne's voice turned sickeningly sweet, caressing each word like a lover. That night at the Four Seasons bar. You were so beautiful, so hungry for success. The way you looked at me, I knew then you belonged to me. Remember what you said? I've never met anyone like you. You meant it then. She pulled out more photos, letting them fall like rose petals. Look, our first weekend in the Hamptons. The yacht in Monaco. Every moment when you were truly mine, before she poisoned you against me. I was drunk and naive. Ethan shouted back. Young and stupid and ambitious. And you saw someone you could control. Like all the others before me. The others? Vivienne laughed, high and brittle. They were nothing. Toys, playthings, brief amusements. But you were different. Perfect. The way you surrendered to me, let me shape you, mold you. Every promotion, every client, every dollar in your account, all orchestrated by me. I made you. You destroyed me. His words echoed through the house. The blackmail, the threats, using your own daughter as a cover story. Do you know how sick that is? Using Isla. Isla. Vivienne spat the name like poison. She was always in the way. Even as a child, always needing attention, stealing my spotlight. But she served her purpose, didn't she? The perfect smokescreen for our love. No one suspects a man of sleeping with his mother-in-law. Something snapped in Vivienne's eyes. Her hand moved to her purse, emerging with a gleaming knife. We can fix this, darling. Run away together. I have money, connections. We can disappear, be together properly. Mother. Isla's voice cut through the tension. Drop it. But Vivienne was beyond reason. You, she snarled at her daughter. This is your fault. You took him from me. Just like you took everything else. The way you'd cling to your father's, my husband's, any man who showed me attention. Always the pretty little daughter, stealing my light. He was never yours, Isla said calmly. He was made for me. Vivienne lunged forward, the knife slashing through the air. Ethan tried to dodge, but she was faster than anyone expected. The blade caught him across the chest, blood blooming on his white shirt. They grappled, spinning across the room. Vivienne's words came in a frenzied rush. Remember Bali? The private villa, making love as the sun rose? The diamond bracelet you gave me in Dubai? Every gift, every touch, it was real. Because you gave me no choice. Ethan gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. Every gift was bought with your money, every trip arranged by your assistants. It was all you, controlling everything. The knife flashed again. This time, Ethan couldn't move fast enough. The blade sank deep into his stomach. He collapsed, eyes wide with shock. Vivienne stood over him, breathing heavily, knife dripping red. If I can't have you, my love. The second knife, the one Isla had planted earlier, slid between Vivienne's ribs with surgical precision. Her mother's eyes widened in shock as she turned to face her daughter. You always wanted him to yourself, Isla whispered, twisting the blade. Now you can die with him. Together forever, just like you always wanted. Vivienne's lips moved, trying to form words, but only blood came out. She crumpled beside Ethan, her hands still reaching for him even in death, fingers brushing against the photos of their forbidden passion scattered around them like fallen leaves. Isla surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. The photos and letters scattered across the floor, evidence of their affair for the police to find. The knife in her mother's hand, purchased weeks ago, her fingerprints carefully placed. Her own gloves, ensuring no trace would lead back to her. Outside, the waves continued their endless rhythm as Isla dialed 911, letting terror fill her voice. Please, help. I found them. My mother, my husband. There's so much blood. Please hurry. As she waited for sirens in the distance, Isla looked down at the two people who had betrayed her, now forever locked in their twisted embrace. In death, they had finally achieved what they'd always wanted, to be together. Her mother had taught her well. Too well. Detective Maya Rodriguez stood in the beach house's living room as dawn broke over Miami, the crime scene illuminated by harsh police lights. Two bodies lay where they had fallen, blood congealing on the imported Italian marble. The night shift criminalists worked methodically, photographing, measuring, collecting. Walk me through it again, Mrs. Monroe, Maya said, studying Isla's tear-stained face. The young widow sat on the deck, wrapped in a shock blanket, her designer dress still spattered with blood from her attempts to help the victims. I was worried about Mother, Isla whispered, her voice breaking perfectly. She'd been unstable lately, obsessed with Ethan. I thought if we all talked. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Maya turned to examine the evidence markers. A leather photo album lay open, its contents scattered, intimate photos of Ethan and Vivienne spanning years. Hotel receipts. Love letters. A timeline of obsession documented with frightening precision. Maya knelt beside Vivienne's body. The suicide note lay nearby, handwriting clearly matching the countless love letters. I couldn't bear to lose him. Now we'll be together forever. Isla, forgive me for everything. Mother. The knife wounds are consistent with her story, CSI Tech Thompson reported, pointing to the blood spatter analysis. Vivienne Crawford attacked first, multiple strikes. The final wound on her, different angle, likely self-inflicted in remorse. Phone records. Maya asked her partner. Multiple calls between victims in the weeks leading up to this. Plus dozens of anonymous threatening messages sent to both parties. Looks like Mrs. Crawford was using burner phones, stalking him. The detective moved to examine Vivienne's Mercedes. The trunk contained more evidence of obsession, surveillance photos, hotel booking confirmations, even a private investigator's reports on Ethan's movements. In the glove compartment, they found prescription bottles, anti-anxiety medications, sleeping pills, all recently filled. Mrs. Monroe, Maya called, watching Isla's reaction carefully. "Did you know about their affair?" Isla exhaled shakily. "I found out recently. I tried to understand, to help Mother get treatment. She'd done this before, you see. Becoming obsessed with younger men. But never this bad." The forensics team confirmed her story. Trace evidence showed regular meetings between Ethan and Vivienne at luxury hotels. Credit card records revealed expensive gifts, secret vacations. And statements from Vivienne's household staff painted a picture of escalating instability. "She kept a shrine to him," the housekeeper testified. "Hidden room behind her closet. Photos everywhere. Would spend hours in there, talking to them. Recently, she became convinced he was seeing someone else. That's when the darkness really took hold." Maya examined one of the love letters found in Ethan's jacket. The handwriting matched the ones in Vivienne's private collection, but the words were unhinged, obsessive. "My love, you are my beginning and my end. No one will take you from me. You are mine. Forever. If she tries, she will regret it." Maya glanced at Isla. "And you had no idea?" Isla's face crumpled. "She was my mother. How could I have known she was sleeping with my husband? I saw the signs, I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined this." The investigation continued for weeks. Maya dug deeper, looking for inconsistencies, hidden motives. But every piece of evidence supported the same conclusion: a tragic crime of passion. A wealthy socialite's obsession turned deadly when she couldn't possess the man she desired. Security camera footage from neighboring properties showed exactly what Isla reported: Ethan arriving first, then Vivienne, clearly agitated. The timeline matched perfectly. Too perfectly, a small voice in Maya's mind whispered. But the evidence was overwhelming. DNA analysis. Blood spatter patterns. Fingerprints on the weapon. Even gunshot residue tests supported the murder-suicide theory. The psychological profile fit: Vivienne's history of controlling behavior, her pattern of pursuing younger men, her recent mental decline. 6 weeks after the murders, Maya sat at her desk reviewing the file one last time. Something about Isla Monroe's composure nagged at her. The young widow had been devastated, certainly, but also controlled. Precise in her grief. She studied the crime scene photos again. The scattered photos seemed almost artfully arranged. The suicide note's placement was theatrically perfect. But there was nothing concrete, nothing she could take to a prosecutor. "Still bothered by the Monroe case?" her partner asked, dropping a fresh coffee on her desk. "Something feels too neat," Maya admitted. "Like every piece of evidence tells exactly the story we're supposed to see." "Sometimes the obvious answer is the right one," he shrugged. "Jealous lover, murder-suicide. Tale as old as time." Maya signed the final report, officially closing the case. Across town, in her newly inherited Coral Gables mansion, Isla Monroe poured herself a glass of wine and smiled. Every detail had played out exactly as planned: the planted evidence, the carefully crafted timeline, the subtle manipulation of her mother's existing obsession. The police had found exactly what she wanted them to find, looked exactly where she led them to look. They'd never know about the weeks of preparation, the careful study of blood spatter patterns, the practiced forgeries of her mother's handwriting. They'd never find the real suicide note, the one that told the truth about Vivienne's 3-year affair with Ethan, about their plans to escape together. The one that would have made the police look harder at the grieving daughter. Isla raised her glass to the setting sun. Her mother had taught her well, about manipulation, about control, about getting exactly what you want. And what Isla had wanted was perfect revenge. 6 months after the tragedy, Isla Monroe sat at her favorite table at the Four Seasons Palm Beach, gazing at the ocean that stretched endlessly before her. The waves rolled in with rhythmic certainty, much like the carefully curated life she had built for herself. Their hypnotic crash against the shore mirrored the steady beat of her own existence, a life refined, orchestrated, and now wholly in her possession. The black mourning attire had been replaced with a flowing white sundress, the color of renewal. Her mother's diamonds, glistening at her throat, felt heavier than usual, a fitting tribute to the empire she had inherited, yet a weight she had long prepared to bear. That morning's headline in the Miami Herald had been a final confirmation of her triumph. Monroe Estate settlement complete. Tragic widow inherits empire. The numbers were staggering. Her mother's expansive real estate holdings, investment accounts, and art collection, combined with Ethan's wealth and life insurance payout, had positioned her among the most powerful women in South Florida. And she was still not even 30. The Maître d' approached with a warm but professional smile. "Everything to your satisfaction, Mrs. Monroe? We've missed your presence." Isla offered a small, controlled smile, placing her fingers lightly on his arm. "It's been difficult. But my mother always loved this place. It seemed right to return." Her voice carried the perfect touch of melancholy, her expressions soft yet unreadable. She had honed this act over the months, the grieving widow at the funeral, clutching her mother's pearls as she accepted condolences. The devastated daughter in therapy, speaking hesitantly about her loss. The resilient survivor at charity meetings, channeling her pain into noble causes. The world had embraced the narrative she had woven, and she had played her part flawlessly. The media had celebrated her strength. "Isla Monroe rises from tragedy," one headline declared. "A testament to grace under fire," another proclaimed. If only they knew how precise those words were. She had been tested by fire, and she had emerged unscathed. Every move calculated, every detail meticulously designed. Her phone vibrated on the table. Another message from Detective Rodriguez. The woman still reached out every so often, under the guise of checking in. Isla knew better. There was something in the detective's persistence, a curiosity that refused to be buried. But it didn't matter. Let her wonder. Let her suspect. The puzzle was complete, and every piece fit exactly where Isla had placed it. A waiter arrived, placing a fresh martini before her. "Compliments of the house, Mrs. Monroe." She ran her fingertip along the rim of the glass, watching the liquid shimmer in the candlelight. This place had always been filled with memories. Some, she had carefully preserved. Others, she had erased with the precision of a surgeon. Once, there had been whispered conversations over these very tables, stolen glances exchanged in dim corners. The echoes of laughter and promises still lingered in the air, ghostly reminders of a past she no longer had use for. She lifted the glass to her lips, letting the cold bite of the alcohol spread through her. The world believed her story. Every person who had doubted her had been silenced by the overwhelming evidence she had so carefully planted. There was nothing left to question, nothing left to fear. And yet, as she sat there, looking out at the darkening sky, a strange thought crept into her mind. And now what? For months, she had lived for this moment, constructing every detail, anticipating every outcome. Now that it was here, an unfamiliar feeling settled over her. Not guilt, not regret, but something more unsettling. An emptiness. For the first time, there was no next move to plan, no threat to eliminate. The silence she had once cherished now stretched before her, vast and unyielding. She took another sip of her drink, allowing the warmth to settle in her chest. She had won. She had survived. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what came next. What was left when there was no one left to deceive? No one left to outmaneuver? The thought clung to her, unwelcome and relentless. She shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of how still everything felt. The air was warm, the restaurant filled with soft chatter, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Life moving forward. But hers had stopped. She had spent years orchestrating her freedom, crafting the perfect escape from the shadows of her past. And now that she had it, there was nothing left to chase. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Rodriguez. Just 3 words this time. "Thinking of you." She expected to smirk, to dismiss it as another futile attempt to crack a case that had long been closed. But the reaction never came. Instead, She set her phone down slowly, her fingers lingering over the screen. She finished her martini in silence, barely tasting it. The maître d' passed by again, offering a polite nod. Isla returned it but felt nothing. A year ago, she would have enjoyed the moment, savored the performance. Now, it all felt like a script she had already memorized, one she no longer cared to recite. She pushed back from the table, leaving a generous tip as she stood. As she stepped onto the terrace, the warm night air wrapped around her. The scent of salt and jasmine lingered, familiar and unchanged. She looked out at the horizon, where the last remnants of daylight met the endless ocean. How many times had she stood before something like this, seeing only possibilities? Now, she saw nothing at all. A flicker of something old stirred within her. Doubt. Not doubt in her actions. Those had been necessary, but doubt in what remained. She had spent years learning to move like a ghost through life, to bend the world to her will, to eliminate obstacles before they could become threats. But without opposition, without a game to play, she was weightless. She had erased the past. The future had yet to be written. But for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to turn the page. Her phone buzzed one last time, and this time, she didn't look at it. She slipped it into her purse, stepping away from the terrace and back into the world she had created. She was ready for whatever came next. At least, she told herself she was.